Hello folks, it is time for another 40k rant, and this one isn't going to be as harsh as you think it's going to be. In the past, I've done videos on the Space Wolves where I've absolutely torn them apart on why I don't like them, but I'm going to throw them a bone, see what I did there, in this video, where I talk about what they could be doing better and how they can fit into 40k a little bit more. I am actually on your side, Space Wolf fans, believe it or not. I like Nordic factions. I think they're pretty cool. I just think Games Workshop have kind of, dropped the ball on this one. So before we do anything else, let's jump straight in, because it's taken me a long time to put this video together. A few sources here and there, and, it takes a while to write these things. So if you like what I do, subscribe to the channel and all that fun stuff. Let's get into the Space Wolves though, shall we? So, about 2 years ago, I did a full video on why I really do not like Space Wolves when it comes to their place in Warhammer 40,000. That video was more of a gut feeling though, very raw and filled with general cringe and copium on my part. And general dislike, This year though, I wanted to approach the Space Wolf problem with more of an open mind, and even with a motive to actually fix them in the lore. This is what I do on this channel. I have big boilerplate talking points that I like to go over every once in a while, because there are huge things in the general zeitgeist of the hobby that I think needs more than one video, right? And your opinion may change a few years later. So those of you who are OG members of the channel will know I've done like 3 videos on Space Wolves, including this one right now, right? At least one a year, where I examine them, go back, and see if my opinion has changed somewhat. And you know what? It has. Quite a bit, which is why I'm doing the video. Later on in the video, I think you will see that with a few small changes to their overall lore, that they become an army that even a jaded Space Wolf hater like myself would love to collect. In our video today, we are going to cover why the Space Wolves do not work in Warhammer 40,000 from a lore perspective, how they take their tropes way too far, and how they generally add nothing of note to the setting at all. Then, we will fix them. Alrighty, so, Cringe Vikings riding wolves. Here we are. We know where we are with these Cringe Vikings. We know what they're doing here, right? I will level with you. I'm not really a fan of Space Marines riding mounts unless they are metal as all hell, and even then, it's still kinda cringe. Magical mounts, to me, belong in Warhammer Fantasy. You cannot tell me that riding a wolf into battle against tanks that can level an entire city block, even things like a Land Raider can split an apartment block in 2 with las cannon beams, is a good idea in any way. Your wolf will last all of 3 seconds before being turned into beef jerky. It is not a good idea. It also looks ridiculous on the tabletop to be faced with these idiotic looking Thunderwolf cavalry units, which you'll see on the screen in a little bit. Their poses are comical, and they carry none of the menace and threat that a literally gigantic wolf should. Would a resculpt help this issue? Perhaps. They are old models. But the main problem of this being an unrealistic and cringe idea is still there in full force, at least for me. It is also a symptom of a much larger problem. The Space Wolves are a faction that the Warhammer 40,000 setting bends over backwards to try to accommodate. In this grim, dark and serious setting, and I know it's bonkers in terms of power level and a bit silly at times, but being powerful and a bit silly at times does not mean your setting lacks seriousness. The Space Wolves in modern day Warhammer 40,000 stand out like a sore thumb. If you want to see themes like the Space Wolves done correctly, then look to the Blood Angels. Yes, they are space vampires, but they are much more than that, and their affinity for blood actually has an understandable reason for existing that is explored in the Horus Heresy novels. This legion was a legion of actual cannibals because certain parts of their Astartes implants were malfunctioning long before the Great Angel even arrived. All we are given with the Space Wolves is the barest explanation of the Canis Helix, and that is, It's a genetic mutation given to them by the Emperor. Not an accident or a negative thing, because the Space Wolves aren't allowed to take a loss even on their genetic level. The Blood Angels treat their vampiric nature as a curse, and a shameful one at that, their entire chapter slowly circling the drain as they succumb to the backlash of their Primarch's demise. In essence, they have depth, and there is serious consideration given to why the Blood Angels have such powers and how they are used. Space Wolf novels, on the other hand, spend far more time dumping on other Space Marine chapters than they do bothering to explain how the Space Wolves actually get their powers. I will get into this later in the bias part of the video, but let's just say that the genetic makeup of the Space Wolves and why it is interesting is something you'll need to go on a wiki to find out, and even then, you won't find much. Why is this an issue? Well, if you have a marquee sci-fi universe or setting on your hands that's breaching into the mainstream, and your fans need to go to a wiki to find something out, your setting has failed, and you have found a key weakness in it that needs tightening up in the canon and the stories you are telling. The Space Wolves are one of 40k's biggest weaknesses when it comes to this kind of hand-waving storytelling to get to the good stuff. When I look at the roster of Warhammer 40,000 chapters, Space Marine chapters, the Space Wolves seem to be from a bygone age when the setting was not as serious or as linked together as it is now. Let's be honest, the Space Wolves, as they are, belong in the same universe as Inquisitor Obi-Wan Kenobi and Sly Marbo. Don't get me wrong, I'm all for these characters when there is a lore reason behind them existing, as in Marbo, and their insanity lends more to their faction. The Doom Rider is a brilliant example of this. Is he silly? Yes. He's a Chaos Space Marine riding around on a bike that's turned into a demon, and he just bleeds into reality and out of reality again, murdering people as he goes, right? Yes. Very, very, very silly stuff. He is, though, a manifestation of the pleasure of going at high speeds. He is essentially a walking heavy metal concert and the most headbanging that Slaanesh stuff ever gets to do. He works in the setting. The Wolves make me sad. This is because whilst Doom Rider isn't trying to be cool or great, he just is, the Space Wolves and their lore tries to make you think, wow, these guys are really cool, without ever actually backing up those claims beyond the fact that they are cheesy-ass Vikings in space. This may be enough for you, and if it is, that's grand, but I respect 40k's lore, and this does not cut the mustard for me. It just doesn't. The Space Wolves let the team down. The most strange thing that the Space Marines get before we get to the Wolves are the Blood Angels, right? And we've covered them already. The rest of the Marines have interesting lore and backgrounds, create colour schemes and specific ways of fighting that really speak to those reading about them. And they really do cover all bases with the Space Marine chapters. Even second founding chapters and further on chapters like the Raptors have interesting aspects, or sometimes even outshine their parent chapters. Black Templars, anyone? The issue with the Space Wolves is that the lore tells you they are super badass warriors, but in the wider lore, never mind the game, we know that is not the case. Close combat specialist chapters like the Flesh Tearers and Black Templars would tear the Space Wolves limb from limb in a master engagement if it came to blade action. The Imperial Fists and Raptors would have them beat on bolter drills and tactics. The Ultramarines would swarm them with numbers and tactically pull them to bits. The Raven Guard and Carcharodons would fight without honour and keep the Wolves at bay whilst assassinating and tearing apart key targets. So please, dear listener, who do the Wolves actually beat of the normal Space Marine chapters? Mano a mano. Chapter versus chapter, who do they beat? And by beat, I mean the A-tier chapters. The A-tier chapters. Not your jobbers. I don't mean Lamenters, right? I love the Lamenters, but we are where we are in the lore. Okay? I mean the A tier chapters. I don't think the Space Wolves beat any of them. And that's before we even get to the S tier power Space Marines, like Grey Knights. And I'll get to that load of nonsense later, alright? So when you look at the Rogues Gallery of Space Marines, the Wolves stand out to me for all the wrong reasons. They are covered in fur, look like shaggy Vikings from a Saturday morning cartoon, and even in their specialities, close combat, assaults, they are far outstripped by other, younger Space Marine chapters. So what is the point of them in modern 40k? I'd argue they don't have one. Alright. Net zero. So what do the Space Wolves add to the wider setting of Warhammer 40,000? Well, I'd argue they are a net zero in their contributions at least. In the Horus Heresy, they are ineffective and kind of mentally challenged, with Lemon Russ abandoning the Siege of Terror to assassinate Horus and almost dying in the attempt, doing nothing but pushing Horus closer to ultimate power in the grip of chaos. Oh, and being the main reason Magnus was forced to turn to chaos also, yes. Good job, Space Wolves. You are a real positive for the enemy that have a hard time understanding how you are on the Imperial side at all. Right? You fail to assassinate Horus, you push him closer to getting more powerful with chaos, and you turn the Thousand Sons against the Imperium. Well done. Well done, right? That's what they do. In modern Warhammer 40,000, the Space Wolves have done remarkably little compared to other chapters. Let's see, shall we? The Ultramarines are the main protagonists, for better or worse, of the setting, and they've been in so many conflicts that it kind of gets kind of silly after a while. The Tyrannic Wars, the modern, Black Legion Wars, the Plague Wars. I could go on, right? The Blood Angels had both the devastation of Baal and a lot of other massive conflicts of which they and their descendants were a part of. The Dark Angels have their Primarch back and are engaging the Fallen across the galaxy constantly, at least until he returned, although their big event still hasn't occurred. The Imperial Fists have had the Iron Cage, the War of the Beast, and so many other conflicts of which they are a part. Do not even get me started on the successors who have upstaged the original chapters. The Black Templars are one of the most active Astartes forces in the setting right now. So, of the other A tier chapters, against all that, what have the Space Wolves actually done in modern 40k? They fought the Inquisition and the Grey Knights. Their own side. Again. I'll get into the Battle of the Fang a little bit later on. But don't count that really, and I'll explain why later. Alright? Let me take a sip of tea here. I'm going to have an aneurysm. So, the studio bias. This brings me neatly over to how the Games Workshop studio seem to have a serious bias towards the Space Wolves. There is a reason, in my opinion, we never see the Space Wolves. Even in their defense against Magnus and his return, they drove off the demon Primarch, yes, and there are now demons on Fenris. Okay. How is that a loss? How? It just means the wolves have more stuff to hunt on Fenris. That's a win to them. So Magnus's big revenge was putting a few demons on Fenris. That was it. Alright? Yeah, he annihilated a few fortresses. Okay, fine. That's it? Dude, Fenris is still there, and the wolves are still there, and they're still fine. Even their biggest loss in the setting, the Battle of the Fang, isn't really a loss, and Space Wolf fans don't even see the Battle of the Fang as an overall negative. Seriously, go ask them. If you've got Space Wolf friends, go and ask them. They will tell you it wasn't really a negative, it was fine. They really don't see it as a negative. The Space Wolves are not shown in the modern 40k landscape because in the modern 40k landscape, everyone gets a bloody nose. Even the wonderful Ultramarines lost their entire first company to the Tyranids. The Space Wolves, though, are not allowed to lose. If it was the Space Wolves fighting the Tyrannic War, they'd have just beaten off. Right, they would have just beaten off well, that sounds really bad, but you know what I mean. They would have just annihilated the Tyranids coming towards the Fang and Fenris and been fine. You know, yes, Fenris would have been devastated, but the Wolves wouldn't have lost any chapters or any companies, any great companies. I'm telling you now, they wouldn't. Right? So, let's examine some examples of the Space Wolves never losing and typically being insufferable and getting away with things that should mean death for them and their chapter, shall we? And I've numbered these from 1 to 7. Number 1. During the Horus Heresy, a Space Wolf strikes Lionel Johnson and the Lion just responds by backhanding him across the room. But this should mean death, on a grudge or not. Number 2. The Space Wolves annihilate the Thousand Suns on their own homeworld, like it's nothing. The writers tried to give some extenuating circumstances to this, as Magnus just kind of rolls over, but still, one legion decimating another without really trying should never, ever occur. And of course, the one time it does, it is in the favour of the Space Wolves. Number 3. Lemon Russ duels with an ascended Horus and very nearly beats him one-on-one, a feat that not even the Emperor could pull off without outside help. Explain that one to me, Wolves fans. Why does your Primarch get to do things that even the Emperor can't? Number 4. They are the only loyal legion almost completely absent from the Siege of Terror. Even pockets of the Shattered Legions are there defending Earth. Even the Dark Angels are there, Corswain's there. The Wolves put their own pride in chasing Horus over the survival of humanity, completely abandoning the homeworld to go on this vaunted hunt of the arch-traitor. Yet nobody seems to bear a grudge for this. This is the Imperium. They'd hate the Space Wolves for doing that. Number 5. They are mutants who actively break down into Wolfen, werewolves, I know, fucking lame, in front of Inquisitors and the like to become Wolfen when pushed too hard in the war for Armageddon. This happens several times. They become Wolfen in front of Inquisitors, yet they get away absolutely free with this fact. Something that would lead to the eradication of any other chapter in the setting. Number 6. Logan Grimnar, despite being described as this big old badass, dishonourably kills a Grey Knight Grandmaster out of nowhere whilst the Grandmaster is looking elsewhere and responding to a question an Inquisitor has asked him, when the Inquisition are simply doing their job in keeping the taint of chaos from spreading on Armageddon. It is a horrible job, I grant you, sterilising an entire continent, but in the face of the threat of chaos and what it poses, it is a drop in the ocean, and the Space Wolves do not seem to get this at all. They can't think laterally. They're fucking morons, and Logan Grimnar is a dishonourable little cheat who doesn't deserve the praise he gets. The guy looks like Father Christmas on a sled, for God's sake, right? And the one big kill he gets, he does it dishonourably while the guy's looking the other way. You little rat. Okay? Number 7. The Space Wolves actively, after this, fight the Inquisition. Yes. Yes. They fight the Inquisition. All of it. In an all-out war for months. And not only do they not get annihilated by the amassed firepower against them, after the war, they're completely forgiven. What is this? What is this even? I'm going to have to take a sip of tea. Oh my god. And those are just 7 points. And there are dozens more. But I fear I am close to 3,000 words for this video essay already so far, and I simply must leave the evidence gathering there. The Space Wolves are a cancer, a sore at the heart of Warhammer 40,000. They do not belong in modern day 40k. The entire setting bends and breaks its own back trying to accommodate these fools and the things they do, as the Space Wolves just break every narrative rule the setting has to suit their whims. If your setting has no rules and is completely malleable at any one time, then it is not a setting worth investing time in. I actually think this is the key reason why we rarely see the Space Wolves compared to the other chapters. Games Workshop and their writers are well aware of the cringe nature of Space Wolves and stay far away from them if it can be helped. Space Wolf fans, have you ever wondered why you don't get the same time in the limelight that other chapters seem to get? That's why. Games Workshop know how cringe your chapter is and how much it breaks the law of them just being there as they are, which is why they don't use them. And I think they're doing you a disservice. That is a shame, because I actually think Space Wolves could be kind of awesome and badass if done properly. And that brings me to my final point of the video. How I'd fix them. And I call this part of the video the broken pack. As in a pack of wolves, right? The broken pack. First of all, let's head back to the Space Wolves Legion. All the way back. I would strip almost all of the overtly Norse features from them. They should have their own culture and only resemble Vikings in the same way the Storm Wardens in modern 40k resemble Scottish/Pictish warrior tribes. If you look at the Storm Wardens, and I invite you to do so now, open up your browser, search 40k Storm Wardens, right? If you look at the Storm Wardens, well, I'm actually going to get them up now. I really like them. I think they're really, really, really cool. Alright. So, if you look at the Storm Wardens, you need to examine them closely to see the influence of the Gaelic fighters in their lore and makeup. But once you see it, you definitely see it. This is an awesome feeling and shows a really cool and in-depth lore that is not in your face. It's influenced by history and the different tribes that made up humanity back in the day. They're not just copy and paste Vikings. Well, the Space Wolves to me are to Vikings what the Storm Wardens are to the Picts and Scots, right? That's what I would do. I would have the Space Wolves resemble deep down Norse culture, Viking culture, things like that. No problem there whatsoever, right? But it wouldn't be overt and on the nose. The influences are there, but not so on the nose as to make you roll your eyes. Dull down the colour of the armour. Make Fenris more of a death world of mere Nordic legends that just want you dead. Make the Space Wolves act like the Imperial Fists, but more combat-y. So, they're into unity, shield walls, right? But also with an independent streak, because they are all amazing duelists. So those are the foundations of my Space Wolf Legion before we go anywhere else, alright? They're influenced by Nordic culture rather than being a straight rip-off of it. They are akin to Nordic culture as the Storm Wardens are to Scottish and Pictish warrior tribes of the medieval and ancient era, right? That's where we are in their culture. And in their fighting style, they come from a death world that is a death world. I'm talking Kachan level, blasted Arctic death world, where you have these God of War, new God of War style Nordic beasts wandering around, getting annihilated by them, right? And they're very much into unity and shield walls and brotherhood, staying in the shield wall, discipline. But also, when it comes to one-on-one duels, they're amazing duelists. A Space Wolf, in my setting, in my head, can stand toe-to-toe with a Dark Angel in a duel. Absolutely, no problem with that whatsoever, alright? Moving on into the actual events of the Horus Heresy then. Magnus has seen the mind of the Emperor when he broke the Emperor's wards to warn him of Horus's betrayal, right? And he saw the Emperor's intent to capture him and bring him back for a scolding, not to kill him. So Magnus, in our setting, knows that the wolves are on their way to arrest him and bring him back to Terra to talk to his father. And he's fine with that. He's fine with that. Finally, I get my chance to convince my father that banning all psychic stuff is ridiculous and shouldn't happen, right? As such, when the wolves show up looking for blood at the command of Horus, the Thousand Sons are standing down, not even preparing for war. They're preparing to go into orbit to meet them, to go to see the Emperor with the wolves and argue their case. Because in my setting, Leman Russ actually likes Magnus. They get along. They're good friends, right? And so Leman Russ is going there with shaking his head in disappointment that he needs to, fight his brother at the behest of the War Master, and he thinks the Emperor, whereas Magnus is going, of all the people, great, I can go back home with my brother Leman, and we can talk to the Emperor, and everything's going to be fine. And then the fall of Prospero happens. The end of the fall of Prospero, though, right, should have tainted the wolves to become Wolfen and shatter their legion. This is why they are not later at the Siege of Terror, rather than Leman Russ just being an idiot in the normal lore that we have, right? So the war for Prospero annihilates both sides, okay? The wolves are definitely winning, but the sorceries unleashed by the Thousand Sons passes their taint, their warp taint, because they're all mutating, right? All the Thousand Sons are mutating slowly, right? They pass that gift, quote unquote, onto the Space Wolves as a last fuck you, right? And that creates the Wolfen. The Wolfen are now born, and most of the Legion become these ravening monsters. And so it backfires on the Thousand Sons, and most of both legions are annihilated, shattered on Prospero. Communications between the two forces are confused by infiltrating Alpha Legion and Wordbearers to keep either from realizing Horus's ruse until it is far too late. Magnus and Russ should almost kill each other as the Wolfen become a thing around them, and whilst Russ eventually beats him, he is heavily scarred and weakened for the experience, both mentally and physically. We have Magnus, who is dying in Russ's arms, finally tell him of Horus's betrayal and how Russ was a fool for following his orders like a good dog. And do you know what I would do? I would actually kill Magnus here. He dies, right? And I'd give him an honourable death, but have him gone physically, but brought back as a warp entity, demon, by Tzeentch later in the Horus Heresy. So we still get that cool Magnus model, but it's Magnus's rage and vengeance and hatred that's brought back by Tzeentch, right? But he dies here. And I would actually have, the last time you see a loyal Magnus, he reaches up, pats Leman Russ's cheek, and says, "Good dog," and dies. And that breaks Leman Russ, because they've always had this relationship of, jibing at each other, because Russ is the warrior, and Magnus is the wizard, right? They're the two forms of the D&D party, having a go at each other all the time. And that breaks Russ, right? Because him being a good dog has always been a thing between them, right? He says, yeah, if you didn't follow your orders like a good dog, we could have avoided all of this. But Russ is too trusting. He's a warrior at the end of the day, right? He's a warrior, and he trusts his superiors to make the right decisions. He's done it before with the Emperor. He got rid of one of the tainted legions before, remember? The Second Legion, right? Apparently the Space Wolves got rid of. So he's all about following orders and being a good boy, essentially. Rage, yeah, really, 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 shall we say, not somebody you want to cross, but still. This is Leman Russ in our setting. Alright. So when Magnus is brought back as a demon much later on in the series, as a vengeful spirit, he leads the Thousand Sons in fighting both sides. So Ahriman is the one leading the Thousand Sons into the service of Horus, whereas Magnus is leading, another majority of the Thousand Sons to fight everybody at the same time. From here, the Wolves are essentially one of the Shattered Legions, which shows the genius of Horus's plan to send them against the Thousand Sons. Leman Russ sees through the lies of Horus as he starts to believe Magnus's words. As the heresy kicks off and is revealed to all that Magnus was right, Leman Russ flies into a fucking rage and is determined to avenge both his honour and the honour of his brother. he heads off Horus before Horus reaches Molech. So Horus is not ascended when Leman Russ gets to him, right? And he doesn't need the Lunar Wolves to do so. This is a tracker. He's a killer. He's a hunter, right? He infiltrates and cripples the vengeful spirit before crash landing it on Molech. It will be repaired later, don't worry, but he crash lands it on Molech, where he and Horus duel, and Russ actually beats Horus. A pre-ascended Horus, but Horus is so conflicted by what's going on still that Russ is pure of spirit and pure of drive and pure of purpose, and he beats Horus because of that, right? And Russ even admits to himself, normally he couldn't beat Horus, right? But because Horus is so conflicted still about what he's doing, and Russ isn't. Russ is loyal, right? He's a good boy. Deserves his ball. Throw the ball for him. He's a good boy, right? So, Russ is seemingly mortally wounded in the process of cutting his brother down as his warriors fight to extract him, and they manage to do so only because the Black Legion, or Sons of Horus at this time, are so obsessed with protecting their fallen Primarch's body. Horus is dragged, dying, to the Molech portal at the behest of the word-bearers who are there, and the Battle of Molech is actually a desperate gambit by Abaddon and the Sons of Horus to get their Primarch to that portal. They succeed in that book, right? The only thing you need to change about the Battle of Molech, about the book Vengeful Spirit, is that Horus isn't really in it, right? Until he's thrown into the portal, then he is, right? But yeah, it's more about the Sons of Horus getting him to that portal so he can do his power up, right? They succeed in that book, and Horus ascends just as he does in our modern Horus Heresy setting. This final shattering forms the wolves into separate hunting bands. They're now only a couple of thousand strong, right? Essentially, they are Norse warrior bands in space. Each strike cruiser treated as a longship on its own, completely independent of its brothers. Some wolves resent the Emperor for sending them to Prospero in the first place, as they saw the Thousand Sons as their brothers in arms, but others see through to Horus being the architect of everybody's downfall. The assault on Horus is their way of war from now on, right? Sudden and desperate strikes deep behind enemy lines to get riches, like fucking Vikings. The body of Leman Russ is taken back to Fenris and entombed in ice, frozen in time. But, as we head into the modern 40k setting, that ice is slowly melting, as Magnus is on his way to the Fang. So I wouldn't have done the Battle of the Fang yet, right? That's how I'd set up the Battle of the Fang. You have this vengeful spirit of Magnus coming for a reckoning with his brother. And Leman Russ may be waking up. After 10,000 years, some wolves are not loyal to the Imperium anymore, but to their brothers and their thralls, taking mercenary work for the most part. Most others, though, including the very small Space Wolves Space Marine chapter, are loyal, but also require payment for their service, even from their allies, because their numbers are so small, because of the mutation in their gene seed, and the fact that they don't want to grow in numbers, because that'll bring far too much attention to them. They are a small warrior band of brothers, sailing the stars, just as the Norse, the Vikings, did back in the day. Shoulder to shoulder, man to man, on their longships in the void. So that is what I do with the Space Wolves. Alright? What do you guys think? Am I mental? Have I lost the plot finally? Is this the worst lore I've ever written? I don't know. But I think I'd collect that army. I would collect that army in a heartbeat. If the Space Wolves were like that, and they took their losses, they weren't as cringe, right? They weren't as on the nose and ridiculous. They fit into the modern 40k setting, and their lore backs up the fact that they're these badass dudes in space, going around and the kind of grey in their morality, that's the kind of Space Wolf army I'd shell out money for. Definitely. Alright? Those are my Space Wolves. What do you think? I love you all long time. I will speak to you tomorrow for some more Hobby Nightmares. Have a wonderful rest of your day, guys. I hope you enjoyed my attempt at making the Space Wolves a bit more metal. But there we are. I love you all long time. I'll speak to you tomorrow. Have a wonderful rest of your day. See ya. Bye now.